Okay. Please start.
Okay, so since we are not a huge audience, it can be informal, so you can stop me anytime and ask questions, or tell me to go faster if you already know parts of the talk. So, but thanks very much for the invitation. It's a nice place and a nice semester. So I will present a joint work with two colleagues. So the first one is Julien Becht from Central Supélec, who is working a lot on Gaussian processes and sequential design. And the second one, you probably know him already, David Gainsbourger, who attended some workshops here. And the title of the talk is Consistency of Stepwise Uncertainty Reduction Strategies for Gaussian Processes. So first two parts will be introductory. So first I will introduce Gaussian processes, and then I will introduce stepwise uncertainty reduction strategies, so a kind of sequential design strategy. And then in the last part I will present our contribution. So it's a theoretical contribution. We prove the consistency of this class of sequential designs. So the main motivation for my work on Gaussian processes is computer models. So I think you all know computer models already. We replace a real experiment by a simulated experiment on a computer. And this can be applied in nuclear engineering, in aeronautic, and in climate science, for instance. So for us, the computer model will be a function f, so from an input space x in dimension d, and with a scalar output in R. So x gives f of x. So usually in industrial computer models, the outputs are complicated. There are spatial temporal maps or functions depending on time. And so here we extract one scalar quantity of interest from these outputs. So x represents the simulation parameters. For instance, the geometry of a component that is tested by the computer model. And f of x is the scalar quantity of interest, for example, an energetic efficiency. And this function f, in this talk, and usually it's assumed to be continuous or to have derivatives. It's assumed to be nonlinear, and it does not have a pre-specified form. So it's not a polynomial or anything. And in this talk, it will be a black box. So we can only select input x and observe f of x. So I'm not really a numerical analyst, so I don't know what equations are in the function f. Okay, so Gaussian processes. The idea of Gaussian processes is to model this black box function f. So for instance, this black function as a realization of a random function. And for the random function, we choose a Gaussian process. That we write x gives chi of x. So a Gaussian process, informally, it's a random mechanism that generates functions. So it can generate these color functions here. And we say that the black function, even though it's a deterministic function coming from physical modeling, we say that it's a realization of the Gaussian process. And then the aim is to observe the computer model function at the black dots and to use the Gaussian process model to reconstruct the rest of the trajectory of the function. So some more specifications on the Gaussian process. So the definition, a stochastic process chi from X to R is Gaussian if, when I take any n input points x1 to xn, the random vector chi of x1 to chi of xn is a Gaussian vector. Then a Gaussian vector is characterized by the mean vector and the covariance matrix, and it's the same for Gaussian processes. They are characterized by the mean function and the covariance function. The mean function is the function that takes x and returns the mean value of chi of x, that we'll write m of x. The mean function can be any function from x to r. Usually there are two possible cases, or three possible cases. Something that is quite frequent is to take the mean function equal to 0 or to a constant. Then it's also frequent to take a polynomial or an affine function for the mean function. And then if, especially working with natural data, with some expertise, we can take a more complicated mean function that represent a physical quantity. And then there is the covariance function, which takes two inputs, x1 and x2, and returns k of x1, x2, which is the covariance between k of x1 and k of x2. So usually this covariance function will be assumed to be stationary. So k of x1, x2 is a function of only the difference between x1 and x2. So it means that the distribution of the Gaussian process is invariant if I move in the input space. So this is usually used when we don't have a priori information about what the computer model will look like as a function of the input space. Usually it assumes that the covariance function is continuous, which more or less means that the Gaussian process realizations will be continuous functions, so like these functions here. And then usually it assumes that k of x decreases with the norm of x, and that the limit of k of x is 0 when the norm goes to infinity. So here I will give some more information about this covariance function. We have seen that the mean function can be any function, but for the covariance function you cannot take any bivariate function, because you need to obtain covariance matrices that must be non-negative definite. So the constraint is here. A function can be a covariance function if and only if for any n, for any input points x1 to xn, and for any lambda 1 to lambda n, the quadratic form obtained from the k of xi xj must be larger or equal to 0. So it means that the covariance matrix must be non-negative definite. And there is a lot of mathematical work on this when x belongs to Rd. There are many results, for instance, the Borchner theorem, that give a catalog of valid covariance functions. If x is not in Rd but is in a more unusual space, like the sphere or space of functions, then there are more open mathematical questions to say which function can be a covariance function. Okay, and often we require the covariance function to be positive definite, which means that if x1, xn are 2 by 2 distinct, and if lambda 1 to lambda n are non-zero, then the quadratic form is strictly positive. So this means that the covariance matrix k of xi, xj must be also invertible when x1, xn are 2 by 2 distinct. And this means that no k of x can be expressed as a linear combination of k of x1 to k of xn when x is not equal to one of the xi. And this means that the realizations of k are sufficiently complex, because if you do not observe k of x, you cannot predict it exactly from other values of the Gaussian process. So this is often desirable when we want to construct a Gaussian process model.
I have to say, on the numerical analysis, I am really happy that you make a distinction between these two cases, because for 5 months we've had everybody just saying covariance matrices are always positive definite, and I know there's kind of in some disciplines the word positive definite is used to cover both cases, and then at least if you're doing linear algebra you always make a distinction between these two cases, so that makes me quite happy.
Thank you. Okay, so I give one example of a common covariance function that we call Matern 3/2, because it comes from the general Matern model, which has a smoothness parameter which will be 3/2 here. So these are stationary covariant functions that only depend on the absolute value of x1 minus x2. So they look like this. They start at the maximum value and they decrease and go to 0. And they are exactly one time differentiable at 0. And they are infinitely differentiable everywhere else. So they are parameterized by a variance parameter sigma square, which is just a multiplicative factor here, and a correlation length parameter L, which divides the distance between x1 and x2. And then it's a polynomial time an exponential. So we see that this covariant function is stationary, discontinuous, and it decreases with the distance. We see that the parameter sigma square corresponds to the variance. So sigma square is the value of the function at 0. So it gives the order of magnitude of the realizations of the Gaussian process. And then L, the correlation length, divides the distance. So it means that L corresponds to the speed of variation of the realizations of the Gaussian process. So if L is large, then distances will be reduced, and so the Gaussian process realization function will move slower with the space. So maybe I'll just write it here. So if L is very large, the realization function, they will move very slowly, maybe like this. And then if L is very small, then any small distance will be divided by a small number, and so it will be inflated. And so the realization function, they will move faster, maybe like this. Okay. And there are generalizations of this covariance function to larger dimensional inputs. So in practice, when we work with a computer model, we need to select values for the parameters of the covariance function. For instance, sigma square and the correlation length. And usually they are estimated from the observation chi of x1 to chi of xn. And then there are several estimation techniques, so I mentioned two of them: maximum likelihood, which is the most commonly used, and cross validation. So in this talk, I will not address this problem. So I will assume that the mean function m and the covariance function k are known for the Gaussian process. Okay. Now we'll present a theorem which is called the Gaussian conditioning theorem, which is one of the main explanations why Gaussian processes are popular. This theorem will say that we can condition the Gaussian process from evaluations explicitly. So we need some notations. We have the Gaussian process chi, which is observed at x1 to xn. Then we let y be the Gaussian vector of observations. R will be the covariance matrix of the observations, so k of xi xj. R of x will be the covariance vector between a new point x and the observation points x1 to xn. And m will be the mean vector of the observation vector. Then we have a first formula that tells us that the conditional mean, so mean value of chi of x given the observations, that we write mn of x, can be written like this. So it's an explicit formula which uses linear algebra. We see the moments, so covariance matrix, covariance vector, and mean vector, and we see the observation vector. And we have a formula for the conditional variant also, that we write kn of xx, so the variance of k of x given the observations, which is also the mean value of the square, of the mean square between k of x and the conditional mean. It's written as the initial variance minus something that depends on the covariance matrix of the observations and on the covariance vector. So, for instance, we see that if chi of x is independent from chi of x1 to chi of xn, then r of x will be 0. And so we will have the initial mean and the initial variance. And otherwise, we adjust the initial mean from the observations, and we reduce the initial variance, because this is non-negative. So when we add the observations, we reduce the conditional variance. And also an important observation is that the conditional variance does not depend on y. So from one point of view, it can be a modeling limitation, because sometimes it's good that the conditional variance depend on the observations, but also it's a computational simplification, and it allows us to know what will be the conditional variance at x without observing chi of x. And this can be useful for sequential designs. Okay, and we have also more. We have that conditionally to the observations, chi is a Gaussian process with conditional mean function mn and conditional covariance function written like this. So initial covariance function minus a correction that depends on the covariance matrix and covariance vector. So one illustration. Here I take a sinus function in blue that I assume to be a realization from a Gaussian process. We observe it at 4 points, and then we compute in the dashed lines the prediction, which is the conditional mean function with this expression. So we see that we interpolate the observations exactly. We see that we are quite accurate in between observation points, and we can make larger mistakes when we are in the extrapolation domain. And also from the conditional variance here and the conditional Gaussianity, we can construct 95% predictive confidence intervals that are plotted in green here. And we make similar observations. The confidence intervals are reduced to 0 at observation points, and they have a small radius in between observation points, and they are large out in the extrapolation domain. So we have more uncertainty here and here.
So let's say you didn't know what that solid blue line was. You didn't know that. You just had everything else that's on your plot.
Yeah.
And you look at that. So you talk about intervals here. What can I say about so that the blue line is representing sort of like the output of my computer model at some value of x. So let's say I'm interested in the value of f at some x, which is not one of the x's where you have the red triangles.
Yeah.
What can I say given these bounds about the true value of f at that value of x?
Okay, so just given the green bounds?
Yeah.
It means that if the blue line was generated by a Gaussian process, then there is a probability of 95% that, for instance, at x equal -1, the blue line is in between the two green lines.
So if f was a Gaussian process, any Gaussian process, the Gaussian process with the covariance.
A Gaussian process with the right covariance function and mean function.
I mean, it also
Condition
says.
on the data.
Sorry?
Condition on the data.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it also says several other things. This path isn't particularly stationary looking. That is to say, what's going on the left looks, it looks like it's going way up, and on the right, you can't tell what's happening. And the fact that the curve is sloping down says or shows that this predictor is based on the stationarity assumption. It's moving down because it thinks that what's happening beyond the leftmost red triangle is about the same as what's happening on the right, at least the part of the right that it can see. So it is, there's a sort of a non-stationarity element, and all these very flexible estimators are at the hazard of the design that you use. Interpolation is great, but extrapolation, when you don't know that the stationarity assumption holds, is always dangerous in these kind of GPs. The design is critical that you cover the region you want to do prediction at. Does it make sense?
I understand, but
Yeah,
sort of
that's-
the point I was getting at is whether this in some sense tells me about error. We've had lots of debate about this. I just wanted Francois' perspective on it.
So
And what happens in that sort of far field depends on the assumptions you made about the mean.
Yes, for sure.
Because as you get further away, you go back to the prior mean. So if you said it was a linear function, it will become a linear function. If you said it was a quadratic, it will become a quadratic. And far away from the data, that's what you get.
Far away from the data, you just get the X bar or something, or Y bar, you just get the average or something. Yeah, they all turn out
No, it
horizontal.
turns into the prior mean. If you have a prior mean. If you turn the mean zero, then it just goes to zero.
Well, it goes to Y bar or something.
Yeah,
It
Y
goes to
bar,
beta
yeah.
zero, let's say, the second case.
It does depend on what you specify the mean.
It does depend, although, how do I want to say this? Yes, these correlations become zero. The little, what was it, R and cap R, everything become, R, cap R becomes the identity, little r becomes like a 1 and zeros and so on. And when you sort of look at the limit of that, you just get lots of identities floating around. Yeah, you get F, I guess, beta hat, and then you get Y bar if you just add a beta 0 and so on. So,
So it just becomes the linear regression problem.
yes.
So for this example, do you happen to know how small you have to do the percentage to have the confidence interval? Interval
to
include
cover-
the actual solution, the actual function?
No,
I mean, if you make,
I-
if you make that 95%, 50%, I assume
so
I assume the blue line will be within
this is twice the conditional standard deviation,
twice the standard
or
deviation.
1.96.
Okay.
And so here it should be 3 or 3.5. So I
Okay.
think the probability becomes very small.
Yes.
Less than 1%, I think, I'm not sure.
If the blue is drawn from the same process that's assumed in constructing the interpolator, then you're okay.
That's what he said.
And
Here, you're up a creek.
so there are also another family of results and mathematical analysis where you just assume that the blue function is deterministic and has some smoothness properties. And in particular, that the blue function belongs to the reproducing kernel Hilbert space of the covariance function that is used to generate the green and blue lines. And in this case, I think you can also have mathematical results about the error. These results are deterministic then, but I know less this literature. Okay, and now an illustration on the conditional distribution. So we have a Gaussian process, and we know that it takes these values at observation points. And we know that conditionally to this point it is still a Gaussian process. So we can generate realizations of the conditional Gaussian process. It gives us random functions like this. And we see that they have the same smoothness as the original Gaussian process. So here I think it's just one time differentiable. They interpolate the observations. And then, as before, they have smaller variability in between observation points, and they have a large variability here.
So this is not using reproducing kernel? I mean, those realizations?
No, not directly. So
I
we
mean,
have,
how are those computed, those
Yeah.
realizations?
so we have an expression of the mean function and the covariance function.
Yeah.
Then the simplest way is to take a grid, for
Okay.
instance,
Yeah.
200 points, and to generate a Gaussian vector. And then there are more computationally efficient techniques for a very large number of points. Okay, so
So, sorry, just to pick up on that point. So let's say you're conditional, when you're sampling from this condition distribution, numerically, how do you do that? You're just using Cholesky factorization?
yeah, usually it's what I would do. It works. I think it works until at least 5,000 points. I mean that it can be computed. I mean 5,000 values for the grid where you want to generate distributions. And then there are other methods. Okay, so the application to computer experiments. We have seen that we have a code function from X to R that we assume to be a realization of a Gaussian process. So in statistical language, we have a Bayesian framework on a fixed function. We have this fixed computer function, and we say that it's a realization from a random function. And then, with the conditional mean function, we have what is sometimes called the meta model or surrogate model of the code. So it's a function that can be computed very quickly compared to the code, and that predicts the outcome of the computer model. With the conditional variance, we have an error indicator. And we also have the full conditional Gaussian process, so for instance, these realizations. And this enables us to construct goal-oriented iterative strategies. So how to choose the next evaluation points of the code. And we'll focus on these strategies in the rest of the talk. And they are used, for instance, in optimization, failure domain estimation, probability estimation, or code calibration. So we will give examples in the two first cases, optimization and failure domain estimation.
Do you make a distinction between what you call an error indicator and an error estimator?
No, I don't really make a distinction.
So in the numerical analysis community, people often make a distinction between these terms.
So what is the difference?
The difference is an indicator is somehow less good than a. Well, I don't know. It's not a uniform. It's not a uniformly accepted term, but sort of indicators sort of suggest something a little bit ad hoc.
Mm.
So I don't know if that term is used in the same way here, or it has that same connotation. But an argument indicator would sort of suggest that it's sort of based on some intuitive principles, but maybe it's not really. Maybe you can't really connect it to the true error in a sort of a theoretical framework. Is that so? How do you interpret error indicator? This term,
For me, I interpret it as if the computer model comes from a Gaussian process,
Right, okay.
then I have mathematically valid confidence intervals. What I mean.
Thank you.
Now the second part, an introduction to step 1 uncertainty reduction. So we have a Gaussian process chi on the compact domain X in Rd, and chi has a continuous mean function M, continuous covariance function K, continuous realizations, and we know the mean and covariance functions. So in practice, we estimate them, for instance, by maximum likelihood. We have seen that when we observe chi of x1 to chi of xn, the mean and covariance functions, they become mn and kn. And we would like to choose x1 and xn so that mn and kn become maximally informative. And this maximally informative, it depends on the objective. So one classical objective is to predict the computer model outcome anywhere. And in this case, we would like that kn of xx, so the conditional variance, we like it to be small everywhere. And so a good indicator will be the maximum value of kn of xx. And then, for instance, there is a second problem where we want to find the maximum of chi. And in this case, we would like the conditional variance kn of x to be small, in particular when the conditional mean mn of x is large. So, for instance,
So you're basically saying you want small variance.
sorry?
You're basically saying you want small variance.
Yes.
Yeah.
But to have small variance, usually we need to put points close to where we need a small variance.
Yeah. That's, yeah.
And we have a limited budget of points. So in dimension 1, if we want a small variance everywhere, it would probably look like this. We have equal space points, so the variance will be maybe like this. It will be small everywhere. And if we want to optimize and if the mean function is like this, then perhaps we would rather like to have points like this. That the variance may be larger here, but it's small in the region where the maximum probably is.
So your area indicator, this conditional variance, you said that doesn't actually depend on y.
Yeah.
Seems a bit counterintuitive.
Normally the data is used to calibrate the covariances and doing estimators of the means on. Then they're using these conditional variances that are more location based, but the data would come in through the estimator of the correlation lengths and these other parameters. So that is how the data would
Yeah.
So, intuitively, why do you want large variance where it's small? Is that because you're not going to spend a lot of samples out there?
Yeah, that's.
But what if you're interested in something that happens in the tail of the distribution?
Yeah, that's why it depends on the objective.
Yeah.
So,
So,
but,
yeah, I mean, we don't care if we have big errors where
No,
we're
but
not
what,
interested,
but
right?
what if you're working in the tail?
Then
trying to
you
find a
gotta
rare
adjust,
event?
yeah, then you change the volume.
Yeah, it depends on your
okay.
quantity of interest. If you're
Yeah,
interested in low probability events,
Yeah.
extremes, then you would have to,
Yeah,
that's the variance you worry about.
okay.
I mean, there are work on probability of failure, for example, and
Yeah,
then they have
right,
changed,
right.
so there are some papers.
Sure.
okay. So the idea of sequential design is to select the point number I plus 1 after having observed the I first values of the Gaussian process. For instance, here, we decide to put more points in the middle because the conditional mean is large. This choice is made after having observed the conditional mean, so after having observed some points, some values of the Gaussian process. So we will do this, and from a mathematical point of view, the observations x1, xn, now they become random observation points, because they are chosen according to the Gaussian process values. So we'll write them capital X1 to capital Xn. Okay, so for the theoretical results of the talk, we'll need some some probability notations. So we have a sequence Xn of observation points or random points in X, and we said that they form a non-randomized sequential design if the observation point k is chosen as a function of the k minus 1 previous observations. So in probability language, it means that observation point n is fn minus 1 measurable, where fk is the information brought by the k first observation points and the k first observed values. Okay, and we have said that Gaussian
So
process.
X1 here that represents K observation? K, capital X1, what is that?
It's the first observation point.
It's the first.
Yeah.
Okay.
And because we observe k of here it's capital X. So there are typos. It's capital X1 and capital XK
Okay.
here.
So you make a constraint that is, it's not a sequential design if you're starting with a design larger than 1.
Sorry?
If you're starting with a design larger than 1 point,
Yeah.
you don't think it is a sequential design.
Ah.
So you can start with 10 points to
Yeah.
create an initial Gaussian process, but then this doesn't hold, right?
So technically, yeah, I would say technically it's a sequential design because a deterministic point x5 which we said it will be 2 in any case, can always say that 2 is the constant function 2 applied to the previous observations.
Okay.
So mathematically speaking, it's a sequential design to have an initial deterministic design. And in practice, I think it's used a lot. So I don't know, usually if you have a budget of 100 evaluations, you will maybe choose 30 points to cover the space at the beginning, and then add 70 one by one in a sequential way. So we have said that a Gaussian process is a random function. So a random function, it's also a random variable in the probability language, and so it has a distribution, and this distribution is defined on a set of functions. And we'll write new such distribution. So new is a measure on the set, a probability measure on the set of continuous functions. And it's a Gaussian measure when the random function with distribution nu is a Gaussian process. And the Gaussian measure nu is characterized by its mean function m nu and its covariance function k nu. Then we'll use this notation in the talk. GP of m nu k nu, it's the distribution of a Gaussian process with mean function m nu and a covariance function k nu. And then we have these technical results that maybe I will only interpret briefly. When we condition by sequential observations, so when we condition the Gaussian process chi with observations x1, chi of x1, xn, chi of xn, where x1, xn are observation points of a sequential design, so they are random. We have the same conditioning formulas as before. We use the same formulas, except that the small x1, xn are replaced by the capital X1, xn. Okay, and now we consider a function h, which takes as argument a Gaussian measure. So as argument, it takes a conditional mean function and a conditional covariance function, and it returns a positive number, which is a measure of uncertainty. So the idea is that we have our conditional distribution, for instance, with this mean function and this conditional variance function. And to this conditional distribution, we associate a measure of uncertainty, so how uncertain we are of a quantity of interest. So I will now give specific examples. First example is related to the expected improvement algorithm. So in this case, we want to maximize the value of the Gaussian process. And here the uncertainty for distribution of a Gaussian process, it's the mean value of the maximum of the Gaussian process minus the maximum of the mean value of the Gaussian process over those input points where the conditional variance is 0. So the idea is that on the right we have what we call the current maximum. So usually it's a maximum over the n observation points, and it's the maximum of the conditional mean which coincides with the observed values. And here we have the mean value of the global maximum that we do not know. And then we look at the difference between the unknown global maximum and the current maximum. And if this is small, it means that we are close to the global maximum. And if it is large, then we need still to optimize more. We have another one which is called the knowledge gradient. So this uncertainty measure enables us to have a sequential design algorithm. We'll see that later. And this sequential design is called the knowledge gradient. So it's less well known than the expected improvement. But it's based on the same principle. Here we have the maximum of the mean function, which is, so to say, a prediction of the global maximum. And here we have the mean value of the global maximum. And again, if this is small, it means that we have less uncertainty on the global maximum. Then the third example is related to failure domain estimation that was mentioned earlier. So here we have our input space, for instance 0, 1, and we have the computer model function, which will maybe be this function, and we have a threshold that we write t, and in an engineering application, if x is so that the output is larger than t, then the configuration is dangerous and we don't want to consider it. This is the case if the output of the computer model is, for instance, in nuclear science, it will be a quantity related to what is called the effective coefficient on the radioactivity. So a new multiplicative factor for neutrons. Okay, so we have this area where it's not safe because the output is larger than t, and we have the rest of the area where the output is smaller than t and which is safe. And we want to estimate the safe area here. And in this case, a measure of uncertainty is this one. Maybe we can look at what is in the integral. We have p nu of u, which is the probability that the Gaussian process at u is smaller than t. So it's the probability to be in the safe area. And we compute p nu of u times 1 minus p nu of u. And this, from probability calculation, it is the variance of the indicator function that chi nu of u is smaller than t. So this, it is small when we are very certain of whether chi of u is smaller than t or not. This is small if this probability p is close to 0 or 1, which means that we have a lot of certainty. And this is largest when the probability is 1/2, which is the case where we have the least certainty. And so we integrate this uncertainty indicator over the input space. And if this is small, it means that the probability is always close to 0 or 1. And so we know well the safe region here. And then the last uncertainty indicator is the case, it corresponds to the case where we are not interested in the region, but only in the volume of the region. In this case, the measure of uncertainty is the variance of the volume of the region. So the variance of the integral over x of the indicator function that k of u is smaller than t. So do you have questions on these examples?
In the third point, are you familiar with how they did it with the quadrature? How they
Yes,
solved it?
that was my question.
For this one?
Yeah.
To evaluate the integral?
Yeah.
No, I don't know too much about this.
Well, in either case,
Yeah, even in the other ones, it's optimization.
yeah.
This? So, for instance, in this case, a good point is that we can define the sequential strategy without having to evaluate these expectations. So if you run the expected improvement algorithm that we'll present after, implicitly it's defined with respect to this, but in practice you don't need to evaluate this.
But you're finding candidates, right? You have to, like a candidate set that you evaluate, and then you pick the one that is maximizing this.
Yeah.
So that could be an optimization routine, right, in a high dimensional
Okay.
space.
But we are not maximizing this directly. We are maximizing the expected value of the uncertainty function with one more observation. So maybe I discuss this.
Yeah, but every time you add a new, it's a new candidate, right? A new candidate point.
Yeah.
So to find the best candidate point, you're optimizing to find what is the best point in continuous but high dimensional space.
Yeah.
D. So that is an optimization routine, right?
I agree, yeah.
Yeah.
So you are, yeah, in
So-
all the cases,
In other cases, you have an integral. So you have to integrate over, when you add this point, you integrate what would be the reduction of variance over the whole space. So that is kind of expensive to do. So how would you do that quadrature? And I guess that most people just use Monte Carlo estimators maybe or something like this. Or it depends on the size of the dimension.
yeah. So it depends on your function h. So I agree. For example, with this one, you have to optimize an integral.
Yeah.
And this integral, can be evaluated by quadrature of Monte Carlo.
Yeah.
But
I was thinking if there's maybe like a clever way, because you know the structure maybe of.
as far as I know, there are clever ways to integrate out the integral over the future value of the Gaussian process
Okay.
by Gaussian computations.
Okay.
But the integral over the input domain, I think there are no shortcuts for the moment.
But you're still in the setting where you have a black box, right?
Yeah.
So all you can do is do evaluations of points, right?
No, you use the conditional Gaussian process.
Oh, I see.
You're not evaluating the original
Yeah.
function at any point.
Okay, okay.
I mean, the P is just like cap phi of something, right? You got a Gaussian process, and so you're calculating a cumulative distribution function of a normal at cap T. So, I mean, there's a cap phi, and there's a 1 minus a cap phi, and I don't know what else happens, but it looks like it's doable.
I think it's doable. I was thinking that if there's some new progressions that I don't know of that is utilizing the structure, since they are working a lot on this.
I think that my experience is there's just like a whole slew of methods that have been used. I mean, we're working on something that's related to this, and we're using particle swarm optimization. But I've seen various direct methods used that optimize by looking, sort of at gradients or something, if you will. And then there's always the derivative Hessian-based methods or whatever, second-order methods, loop methods. But I don't know that there's a consensus in the community that this is the best for all problems. It's a bit of a hodgepodge.
Yeah.
And in high dimensions, you're stuck in Monte Carlo.
If you want to evaluate an integral like this,
Yeah, you have lots of.
I guess people would do Monte Carlo. So the nuclear application of this that I know of is in this paper. And here I think the dimension is not large. It's probably 2. I think in this case they use quadratures rules.
Yeah.
And I think something that has been done is to evaluate each integral with the same quadrature rule, so that we evaluate an integral function as a sum. So let's say they want to maximize over x an integral of a function f of xy dy. And they say, by quadrature, that this is approximately a sum of f of x, yi. And then they maximize this function as a function of x. And they use, for instance, gradient descent because you can compute the derivatives of f. So I think it's an example of something that has been done.
But like, do you assume you know like in 1D where the interval is?
Sorry?
Do you assume like in 1D, do you know that you know where the interval is located?
In this integral?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you know
it's the input domain.
you know the input subdomain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's usually decided from the engineering application at the very beginning.
That takes expert knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's like in usual optimization problem, we decide at the beginning how we want to optimize. So what are the ranges of variations for the geometry parameters? That's fine. Okay, so now we have a function h that defines an uncertainty, and we see from this function how to obtain an algorithm to select future observation points. And the idea is that we imagine that we add one observation at x. In this case, the initial Gaussian measure nu, it becomes conditioned by x and chi of x, and we are happy if the uncertainty of the conditional distribution is small. So we want to choose x so that h of the conditioning is as small as possible. The problem is that this conditioning depends on the value of chi of x, and we don't want to evaluate chi of x at any x, or at all the x. So we put an expectation. So it's an expectation with respect to the value of chi of x. And then this, we write it jx of nu, and we interpret it as the expected uncertainty after observing chi of x. And then a stepwise uncertainty reduction strategy, it consists as choosing at xi plus 1 the minimizer of the expected uncertainty. So here there are two numerical problems. First one is that we have to optimize over the input space. And this, as we discussed, can be done by gradient descent or particle swarm optimization, for instance. And then to evaluate Jx, we have to compute an expectation. And sometimes in H, we have to compute an integral like here. So usually, or in many cases, this expectation here, it can be integrated out. So it can be solved explicitly, and we don't have to perform an expectation numerically. But usually, we cannot solve this integral explicitly, so we use quadrature rules or Monte Carlo. And this altogether, it means that it will take some computational time to choose the next observation point xi plus 1. So this computational time, it has to remain negligible compared to the time to obtain a new run of the computer model. So these stepwise uncertainty reduction strategies, they are used for a costly computer model. So for instance, in our work with Thomas, the computer model takes 15 minutes to run, and we choose the next observation points maybe in 30 seconds or something like this. But then in terms of computational time for computer models, I think it's almost unbounded. So some cases, a computer model can take 1 day or more to run if you want to have a very, very accurate results. So we have seen that automatically for any measure of uncertainty h, we obtain a sequential design strategy. That means that xi plus 1 minimizes a criterion. And now we see for the 4H here, which sequential design we obtain. So for the H related to expected improvement, we obtain this sequential design. So xn plus 1 maximizes the mean value of the positive part of k of x minus the current maximum. So it's called the improvement because if k of x is smaller than the current maximum, we return 0. And if k of x is larger, then we return the increment. So this expectation, it can be computed explicitly. So it's equal to a formula which involves the PDF and the CDF of the Gaussian distribution. And then we maximize an explicit function of the PDF and CDF. Then for the knowledge gradient, we have this criterion. So xi plus 1 maximizes. So here it should be an n, because there is an n here. We maximize the mean value of the maximum of the conditional mean. And this one, I don't remember if the expectation is explicit or not. For the integrated Bernoulli variance, we minimize the expectation of the integral of the new probability of failure, times 1 minus the new probability of failure. So here in this paper, it explains that you can swap the integral and the expectation, and that then the expectation becomes explicit. So you only have one integral to evaluate numerically. Then there is the last one for the variance of excursion volume, where we minimize the mean value of the variance conditionally to k of x. And I think this one is the most complicated to evaluate because the mean value is not integrated out, as far as I know. So I give one illustration of the first criterion, which is the expected improvement for optimization. So here I borrowed some graphics for a journal article, and in this journal article they are minimizing instead of maximizing. So in this slide, we imagine that we want to minimize the computer model output. So we have 4 initial points. So we have observed the computer model at these 4 points. So this gives us a conditional mean, which is this black curve, and conditional variance, which gives this shaded area, which represents the uncertainty. And the expected improvement function EI is this function, adapted to minimization. We see that the expected improvement is maximum here, because we have a lot of uncertainty, which means that it's possible that the Gaussian process here will be small, and that it will improve on the current minimum here. Then we also have a good expected improvement here, because even though the Gaussian process variance is small, the Gaussian process mean is also small. So even if the Gaussian process value is close to its mean, it can improve because the mean is already close to the minimum. So by maximizing the expected improvement, we find this input point here. So we call the computer model on this point. It gives us a new observation here, and we update the conditional mean and the conditional variance. So now the conditional mean also interpolates this point. Conditional variance is reduced to 0 at this point, and at the other side of the domain, it's not really changed. And now we compute again the expected improvement. Besides, the expected improvement is 0 here, because we know the value of the function. And the expected improvement is smaller around this point, because the observation is not very small. So it's larger than the current minimum. So now this region is less interesting, because we have less uncertainty, and the conditional mean is not very small. So now the most interesting region is here, because the conditional mean is small, and we have some uncertainty. And then the maximum of the expected improvement is here, so we will run the computer model at this input point. And this continues until usually we reach a certain budget of evaluations. There are some applications of these stepwise uncertainty reduction strategies. So the most frequent is expected improvement, which is used, for instance, in the car industry and in chemistry to fit parametric models. Then the criteria for failure domain estimation are, I know the use of them in nuclear engineering, and I saw that the knowledge gradient is used, for instance, in drug discovery. Okay, so now I don't know how long I should take to present the theoretical results.
That's why we have 2 hours.
That's not too long.
Exactly why we have 2 hours.
It's fine.
Okay. So, Sam, I present the contribution of me, Julien Becht, and David Gainsbourger, which is on arXiv. And the objective is to obtain general conditions on the Gaussian process, conditional mean and conditional variance, so that we have consistency in the sense, in particular, that the uncertainty after n evaluations goes to 0 almost early when n goes to infinity. And depending on the objective, we also have other results. For instance, for optimization, we show that the current maximum converges to the global maximum.
So, is this for any of those H's or a particular one?
We have results for any H that satisfies some conditions. And we have applications to the 4 H's that we have seen. So I review here some existing asymptotic results on sequential designs for Gaussian processes. This is a paper which appeared in 2012, which provides rates of convergence for an optimization strategy called GPUCB for Gaussian process upper confidence bands. And this is for optimization. So it's not one of the strategies that I presented before. Then there was a result by Adam Bull on the convergence of expected improvement, which is the first strategy that we have seen. And here Adam Bull provides rates of convergence in different settings than our setting. So in Adam Bull's setting, it is assumed that the unknown function is fixed and belongs to the reproducing kernel Hilbert space of the covariance function. So it's the type of result we discussed at the beginning. Where R, for our results, we are in the more pure Bayesian setting, where we work with a realization of the Gaussian process, and all the results are given in probability, assuming we have a realization of the Gaussian process. Then the article which is closest to our paper is by Julien Becht and Emmanuel Vasquez, and proves the consistency of expected improvement in the same setting as us. And let's say that our result for expected improvement will extend their results for some configurations. And then there are also negative results that exist. So for instance, there is this article by Jarodsky that shows that for a specific fixed continuous objective function and for a specific covariance function, the expected improvement can be inconsistent, meaning that it will not cover the whole input space. So intuitively, it's as if, in this case, the expected improvement algorithm is stuck in a local minimum. So, for instance, so quite a degenerate case where the objective function will be like this, for instance, and the expected improvement will just put more and more points around this local minimum. So, this means that there exist in theory cases where the sequential design strategies do not converge, and this can be interpreted as a motivation to provide convergence results, and so excluding these negative cases. So we have first type of results that say that the conditional mean and covariance functions converge as n goes to infinity. So we take any sequential design of experiments xi. So xi is chosen according to the i-1 first values. And in this case, we can show that the conditional mean function mn converges to a random continuous function m infinity. The conditional covariance function kn converges to a random continuous function k infinity, and that the convergences are uniform on x and x times x. And the proof is based on the fact that the conditional variance is decreasing for a Gaussian process, and for the convergence of the conditional mean, it's based on martingale arguments. And also we can say that if we let f infinity be the sigma algebra, meaning the information generated by the infinite sequence of observations, then conditionally to f infinity, chi remains the Gaussian process with mean function m infinity and covariance function k infinity. So this is more difficult to interpret, but let's say that it is a technical tool that we used in some of the proof.
So, what about your convergence proof is violated by that example down there?
This one?
Yeah.
Okay, so in this example, they work in the setting, I think, of a fixed continuous function.
Oh, so it doesn't apply.
Yeah,
Okay.
so our work here does not apply to this example. I think here actually the analysis is deterministic.
Mhm.
So I have a deterministic algorithm that applies to a deterministic function. If I remember well, because I did not
Yeah.
read in detail this paper.
No, that's interesting because that happens all the time in deterministic functions, but with some there are, in the numerical analysis communities, there's randomization algorithms to get you out of those local minimums. I don't know if they're related to this or not.
For optimization?
Yeah, so I mean, you're almost guaranteed most optimization methods are going to find you a local minimum. And then if you want to get out, there are people who do randomization to get you out of the local minimum of that valley. Okay, thank you.
No. Okay, so we have a general definition which is ad hoc in the sense that we chose it because it was working for the proof. And this definition says that a sequence of Gaussian measures, the sequence of conditional mean functions and conditional covariance functions, will converge to a limit measure. So a limit mean function and covariance function. And this definition only applies to sequence of conditional distributions. So it's the sequence of distributions obtained by conditioning an initial Gaussian process. And we say that there is convergence if the mean and covariance function converge uniformly to the limit mean function and covariance function. And we say that it's conditional if each of the Gaussian measures is a conditional measure of a Gaussian process given some information. This information can be evaluations, but it can also be something more general. We have two examples of use of this definition. The first one is most interesting. it's what we have seen in the previous slide, that the conditional distribution of the Gaussian process given the n evaluations converges to a limit distribution, which is the conditional distribution of the Gaussian process given the infinite sequence of evaluations. This is really used for the convergence results. And then we have the second case, which is more used to guarantee that the stepwise uncertainty reduction criteria will be, for instance, continuous or have a well-defined global minimum. And here, the result says that if you condition a Gaussian process by one point xk and the value k of xk, and if the observation point xk converges to a limit point x infinity, then the conditional distribution given xk, k of xk, converges to the conditional distribution given k of x infinity. Okay, now we have an important concept for this work that we call the super-martingale property. And the idea of the super-martingale property is to say that the measure of uncertainty should decrease on average. So we have a Gaussian process with a conditional distribution with n points. So it has an uncertainty measure. And then we add one more point and we consider the new uncertainty. So the initial uncertainty h of conditional distribution p of chi given first n observations. And then we have the future uncertainty h of chi given the n first observation and the chi of x. And we take the mean value with respect to chi of x. Then we say that h has a super-martingale property if we have this inequality, which means that the expected future uncertainty is smaller than the current uncertainty. So that obtaining one more evaluation of the Gaussian process will bring information on average. So it's
not a strict equality.
Yeah, no, it's not a strict equality.
So it could stay the same.
Yes.
So then it's not reducing.
Mm.
Or is it?
So in theory, it could stay the same. So let's say in practice, I think it is usually strict, but there are some degenerate cases. For instance, if here the conditional variance is equal to 0 everywhere, so it can happen if you have a finite rank Gaussian process at the beginning, for instance, then the uncertainty is already 0.
But then it would be nicer to have some kind of strict equality, and stating that in this case, when it is 0, then it is an equality. Because from this result, it's much harder to see that it's consistent.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting to something like if the conditional variance is not 0 everywhere, then we have a strict.
Yeah, for instance.
And if it's 0 everywhere, then h is 0 and we have an equal.
Yeah, you can create like special circumstances for which there is equality, and in these other ones there you would have strict to separate the two cases.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be.
But if you have equality, does that mean that you basically solve the problem?
Yes. So.
So it's fine.
As well as you can.
Well, yeah, right.
So it's not obvious. If you take a specific function h, actually it's one of our conditions on h that we'll see later that says that if we have equality, then the problem is solved.
Okay.
But we write it as a necessary condition, and then we check that this condition holds for the 4 examples. Okay, so super-martingale property, if we have this, And this is equivalent to saying that the sequence of uncertainties is a super martingale, meaning that it decreases on average. And it can be checked that this super martingale property holds for the 4 examples. And this is checked rather quickly. So there will be these few lines of computations that shows that the current uncertainty minus the future uncertainty is larger or equal to 0. So for instance, for expecting improvement, and also with some computations for the integrated Bernoulli variance. And now we have the general convergence result. So we consider this condition, this quantity G, which is related to what we have discussed. So G is the maximum over X of the expected uncertainty reduction. So it's maximum over X of the current uncertainty minus the mean value of the future uncertainty. And if J is 0, it means that we have equality here everywhere. And actually, we have this condition that we just discussed. We ask that if J is 0, then we have solved the problem and the uncertainty H is already 0. So we have it as a necessary condition in the theorem. The theorem says that if we have Xn, which is a sequential design minimizing the expected future uncertainty, and if the uncertainty function H is decreasing on average, then the future uncertainty J, the maximum expected uncertainty reduction G, goes to 0 almost surely. And then if we have a few additional conditions, that is some kind of continuity condition, so that H is continuous when we go from the conditional distribution to the limit conditional distribution, and also that J is continuous. And the third condition that no expected uncertainty reduction implies no uncertainty, then we have the result we wanted, that the current uncertainty goes to 0 almost surely. Okay. Then we have some additional results in the paper that I will just summarize. So we prove that the general results in this slide, they apply to the 4 examples, meaning that we can check for the 4 examples that we have these 3 conditions. Then we also have another type of general results for uncertainty reduction H, which are based on the loss function, meaning that H can be written as an estimation error when we estimate a quantity of interest for the Gaussian process. This quantity of interest can be the maximum or the failure, the safe region. So this region here. And for uncertainty functionals based on loss function, we have another general convergence result, which needs fewer assumptions to test, to check on examples. Okay, so I will conclude briefly. So in the first section, we have seen that Gaussian processes provide a Bayesian framework on deterministic functions like computer models. This gives us a full probability framework where we can define the expected uncertainties and so stepwise uncertainty reduction strategies. And we have proved the convergence of a family of stepwise uncertainty reduction strategies. We have some technical remarks that we like. So we like that we do not need to show that the sequence of observation points is dense in the input domain. So for instance, if the Gaussian process has symmetry, then we do not need to be dense in the observation domain. And there are also, we allow for very smooth covariance functions like the Gaussian covariance function, which is defined like this. the covariance function which is infinitely differentiable. And for instance, this function was excluded in the paper of 2010 on expected improvement. And now we can allow for this function. And sometimes, depending on the criterion, we do not need to show that the supremum of the conditional variance goes to 0. And then there are several open questions. There are two that I consider important and maybe we would like to work on later. The first question is to obtain also theoretical guarantees in the case where we do not know the covariance function and where we estimate covariance parameters, the frequentist or Bayesian framework. And the second question is to obtain rate of convergence. For instance, to say that for instance, in optimization, that the error between the global maximum and the current maximum decreases like 1 over square root of n, for instance. Okay, so that's all. Thank you very much.
So, can you give an example, simple example of what goes wrong when you don't have the continuity?
The continuity of the covariance function.
Yeah.
So I think the most pathologic case is the covariance function that we call the covariance function of the white noise. Sometimes that takes x and y and that associates as a covariance the indicators that x equal y. This means that all the values of the Gaussian process are independent. So I cannot plot the realization of this.
I can understand
Be
that.
like
No, I
this.
can understand that case.
Yeah. So
Okay.
then I don't know. I think if the covariance function is piecewise continuous, you could extend these results. I don't know many models with discontinuous covariance functions.
True.
This expected improvement, if you go up to very high dimensions, I guess you get a lot of problem with extrapolation. Because you get very large variances on the boundaries. So
Yeah.
if you go up to higher dimensions, the number of points on the boundaries becomes a very large portion of your domain.
Yeah.
And then when you're searching and you're getting, like we saw in this plot, that the variance bands can go up very largely on the boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think that is an issue with the convergence, because you will get very poor convergence initially, because it will want to explore all of these uncertainties on the boundaries. So do you think that there's a remedy for this, or maybe you should use one of the other criteria? Because you said a few different criteria.
Yes.
One that is integration.
Okay.
And the integration, I guess, would be more centered points compared to putting it on the boundaries.
Yeah, I agree with this. So maybe not these ones because they are for different objectives, but I think for expecting improvements there are criteria that I did not present, which are also based on integration. So so say you have your domain in a high dimension. You have two types of criteria. The expected improvement criteria, as you say, they tend to go where the variance is largest. So maybe at the beginning they will go to the extremes. Then there is another family of criteria that say if I add a point here, the variance will reduce around this point. And the criterion is based on the integral over the reduced variance. I think it has been adapted for optimization. And with this criteria, it's as you said, you tend to go more in the center, because if you put a point in the center, it reduces the variance on the left and on the right, as opposed to only on the left if you put a point here. So I don't know
I mean, I know this is it's a hard problem in optimization when you are relying on these kind of criteria that you don't trust the surrogate that much in the beginning. If you have a very expensive model, let's say a climate model or something, I guess that you will not even count to the optimization part. You will only get stuck in sequential design part, which would be the maximum, putting the point at the maximum variance, which putting things on boundaries by compared to the integration that is adding in more incentive. The second was that in the beginning you also mentioned the second point that you have a known covariance and you have a known mean function. But I felt at least in the two-thirds of the talk, I don't see that there was a need to make that constraint. But in the consistency test, if you would assume that you have uncertain correlation links and these things, would that change the analysis you think?
The theoretical analysis? Yeah, I think it would change.
Is that something that you guys are working on, or?
Not now, but I will.
Because
I would
that's
like
the practical situation that most people are in, especially if you consider the black box, which you said at the beginning is that you want to deal with that case. But then you go into known covariance, known mean, and then I don't even know if this theoretical result holds.
Yeah, I don't know. I think in general, a lot of problems related to covariance function estimation are difficult. We do not know too much for the moment.
I mean, there are results on asymptotic behaviors of maximum likelihood, let's say.
Yeah.
So if you are under the assumption that your truth function is a Gaussian process realization, then asymptotically maybe there is a way to prove also that you would converge in this setting sequentially to the right value on your covariance.
Yeah.
And then also these other results should hold.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting research map. So take a case where we already have results for maximum likelihood.
Yeah.
So one specific covariance function, and then to use it to extend to sequential optimization, for instance.
Just 2 remarks.
The expected improvement criteria looks at the myopic y hat and then looks at S squared. So if you were going to optimize something, I'm just thinking on 2 dimensions, which is not what you're thinking, but intuitively, if you have something which is big in the middle, and you have any kind of a reasonable starting design, I don't necessarily think it's going to go to the extremes if it thinks the myopic guess as to what the maximum is so much better than what the predictor says, out towards the extremes. It could be in many cases it would explore it if the function's flatter in some sense, but
I think that if the scale is kind of similar in the domain, then it will tend to the variances. But if you have, like you say, like a Gaussian bell thing, then it will not explore the boundaries that much, because it's kind of the trade-off between the two.
Right, exactly.
It's in shape between mean and variance.
Yeah.
If you get that mean right,
Yeah, then it's gonna
that
glom
will
onto the
dominate all
mean
those variances at the edges. But if it's very flat, or you can't find it, it's very sharp and you can't find it, then you're quite right.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.